Hello and welcome to DDK Talks Esports, episode 10. Now there's a couple things to go through before we get into the episode, and the first of which is a reminder that you can listen to this on iTunes and iOS or a variety of podcast apps for Android as well as Spotify and YouTube. I just wanted to raise awareness because I know that 70 to 80%, and judging by my research, of you do listen through YouTube, and YouTube is obviously a great platform for on-the-go listening, and obviously this is audio only and a podcast format, and the strength is on-the-go listening. So just wanted to make the awareness happen there in case that could be a preferred platform for some of you. Now secondly and lastly, before we get into it, obviously this is going to be a solo episode where I just talk about some stuff with psychology, just a bit on the fly, because I was supposed to be recording with somebody else today and it fell through, and this has happened a lot recently. Like, I've had a lot of cancellations and my schedule itself is really busy, so it's very hard for me to be flexible at the moment. So that has led to this dry spell. And I wanted to be very clear that this dry spell is not anything to do with a lack of motivation to do this podcast. I'm still very much into doing this project and to finding ways to continue doing the project, and as a strategy to mitigate this, I imagine it's probably going to happen in the future that either I'll be too busy or there'll be a series of cancellations that could cause this issue. Some strategies that I have is to try to really do more while I'm at events, and I have E-League coming up, so that's going to be a great opportunity. I think the schedule is going to be pretty forgiving. The schedule that we've had at the minors has been very unforgiving for me to be able to do anything podcast related during them. But E-League should be different. So at E-League, I'm going to be trying to schedule and do a bunch as much as I can to backlog some content, which is the second way I'm going to mitigate this issue in the future, by just backlogging stuff. So hopefully it's not too much of an issue and you guys are still enjoying all the content, and I will keep making it. So my aim, my personal goal with this, is to get to at least 100 episodes before I think to myself, all right, is this something that I want to stop, or is this something that I don't want to stop? And 100 might sound like a lot, but we're already on 10, and I think that 100 is going to be a really good jaunt, and I think it's going to be a journey where by that 100th episode I will have improved a lot as a podcast host, and I will also have, I think by that point, diversified the content in a really cool way. I've got some cool ideas that I won't talk too much about at the moment. The other thing I did learn as well is that I should probably refrain from naming names when it comes to guests I want to have because of this cancellation issue. So that's another thing I'm going to stop doing, because I was I wanted to generate the hype, and I was getting hyped myself, and so that's why I was doing it. But I've learned my lesson. So with that said, it's time to get into it. So in lieu of a guest, I am guestless. In lieu of a guest, I will be talking about some observations I have made in psychology, and for whatever reason, it seems to be one of the most popular topics that I address in my content, and I'm always asked to talk about these kinds of things more within the esports context, maybe because there's not too many people giving love to this topic as far as content creators are concerned in esports, but I'll go with some observations, and again, this is very much on the spot, as I was expecting to have a guest now, but I'm confident I can get something interesting here for you. So the first thing, which I think is really curious, and so I wanted to start with this, is somewhat paradoxical in nature, and that is the paradox of, I would say, well, it's what I've called constructive self-delusion or positive self-delusion. I don't know if there is any other term for this. But effectively, what I began to realize as a competitor myself is that I started to realize that I had to, on the server, when I was in the arena against my opponent in this competitive environment, even if a guy opposite me, I could objectively state was better. He has all the, he was, let's say, just for example's sake, this guy's ranked number 1 and I'm ranked number 10 or something, and this guy's won everything and I've won nothing, and so we're way more experienced and this, that, and the other. And, so objectively, I know that this person is better than me, a lot better than me, perhaps. But when I'm facing him, I need to not have that belief, because it will effectively become a self-fulfilling prophecy, and it will create a lot of barriers, and it will not serve as a proper defense to pressure. What will, however, serve as a proper defense to pressure is arrogance. Like, I think one strategy that is effective, it might not necessarily be the optimal one, but it's one of the better ones that I've come across, is a level of extreme arrogance to the degree that you also need to, well, you need to, of course, play the game correctly, and that's obviously what practice is for. But when you're on the server, you need to have a level of arrogance that is pretty extraordinary, and it's just this level of self-belief that is so overwhelming. It quashes as much doubts that could creep in as possible, because when you start getting into an environment where pressure is an issue, that can be a really big problem. Now, I'm talking with regards to this on, like, with my experience on something that is much more individual, because performance in Quake, and even in the team modes, as well as 1v1, of course, it's much more individual and there's less variance. Your fate is a little bit more in your hands than it is in a game of Counter-Strike, where you're 5v5 and there's a lot more factors going on that can really take the control out of your hands, which is where the problems start to happen for players from a psychological perspective. But getting back into the topic at hand, I really do believe that holding this mindset of arrogance is really important. But where does the paradox come into mind, you might be asking? And the paradox is the fact that when you're off of the server, the most effective way to improve and to motivate yourself to improve, to incentivize yourself to improve, is by holding a mindset of humility, maybe extreme humility, in fact, to a certain degree, because you need to be watching everyone. What are your opponents doing? And you have to respect them enough as good opponents to feel like you're motivated to do that. And you have to feel like there's a reward system here that you're in, and a reward system incentivizes you, encourages you, motivates you, inspires you to then go and do the work to watch these people, to like make sure that you yourself do not rest on your laurels, to motivate you to put in the work, because you respect that everyone else around you is amazing and so very good. And at any point, they could all, they could all crush you because you feel like they're so close in skill. And that level of humility will keep you working. So that's like a good and effective mindset when you're out of the competition. And so you can see these two mindsets are completely just opposite to one another. So this is why I sort of call it like this paradox, and why it's interesting, because obviously in the face of something that's objective, like being up against a better player or team, you have to believe that you're something that you're objectively not. So I find that to be very interesting. But I think no one really encapsulated it more when I looked at interviews and so on in CS, more than Olofmeister perhaps, who in the year in which he was being called the best player, I think there was an interview where he said, I think the question was, how does it feel being the best player, being called the best player, or being the best player in the Counter-Strike? And his answer was, I don't believe I'm the best, but I don't believe there's anyone better than me. And that is just so insightful. I feel like that insight was lost on a lot of people, maybe. That was an amazing answer from Olofmeister, because it really encapsulates this idea that to be the best, you have to also recognize that everyone else can be the best. Like this crazy sort of idea of, instead of like being instead of like a self-deprecating answer where he's like, well, everyone's like really good, and I've had like some days I've had like I play like really well, but like these guys, like, that guy's all super good, and like if that guy has his day, he can be really good. Instead of like this like really humble answer like that, he's got like the mix. He's like, I'm not the best, but there's no one better than me. I think that's just so cool to me. Anyway, sort of, so you may be wondering, in which ways you can achieve some of these mindsets. And I think, it's a lot of it is just awareness when it comes to a mindset, because it's about putting it into practice. It's about creating reference points, and reference points come from putting it into practice and just doing it, and just really understanding that's just really how it has to be. And just cultivating the idea that anything that happens, when you're on this journey of trying to become the best player, for example, you have to frame it in a way that comes back to these mindsets. That's really how it works. So, for example, instead of like having a week of losing games and where you maybe let's say having a week where your aim is off, what you do there is you think, okay, well, actually, my aim has been off this week, but that's not really been the reason why I'm losing. This is not a sign of me not improving. Because one thing that you can say that about yourself in this instance is that if I feel like I'm not improving, then there's a really big problem. And that if you, like, one thing that you can also know is if I'm improving like that, if the more hours I put into the game, I'm improving. Like, that's something that will happen. And you also know that you may not see that improvement immediately. So with all these things in mind, you then have to use those to frame this like terrible week or month that you've had, or down period that you've had, into a positive way that will help to inspire you to continue to be creative, to continue to enjoy the process, because that is the most effective way to get to the result that you want, which is to be the best player. And so in this way, it can be really important to have that kind of positive mindset by default. And some people are tuned sort of negatively by default, and not everyone is able to have these sort of self-awareness to change these things. But I think that if you do, I think that's all that really is required is self-awareness. So if you have self-awareness, you can pretty much change anything, or more or less anything about yourself. It just requires a lot of work, because to cultivate a new behavior, to habituate a new behavior, you have to take actions that will reinforce that behavior. So that you have to do things that manifest themselves in the world, that will be a straight reference to that behavior that you're trying to create. So it is possible, but it's just a lot of work. So talking about the next topic, which is achievement, I think, this is a really interesting one, because this really is fascinating. Like, there's so many things going on when it comes to sort of fine-tuning our brains for achieving what we want to achieve, because there's a lot of obstacles. And so we really have to unpack what's going on, and it's very difficult to do that. So one of the ways we can do it is to sort of, again, tackle, like, what do we know about, what observations can we reliably make about ourselves when put up against certain situations. So in a situation where you have to get a bachelor's degree, right, that's a 4-year commitment. It's going to be pretty hard to motivate yourself to study every day, because you're going to rather play a video game than you are going to want to study. In a lot of cases, if someone gave you those two choices with no repercussions, you'd probably pick the one that elicits the most rewards, which is video game. I mean, any video game developer worth their salt will be thinking about the human reward systems. And so, it's much like a dog, right? A very high value thing for a dog is food, because dogs are sort of just concerned with survival, really. And that is partly the case for us as well. And that's actually why there is such a schism in our brains, which we have to tackle. But going back to the dog for a moment, the dog is going to be, the dog's behavior will be modulated, can be altered by giving it food as a reward for certain behaviors. And so I think the human beings are very similar. And, once you start to unpack and understand sort of how the flaws in our psychology works, as well as things that maybe just are facts of our psychology, you get to then put yourself in positions where you can manipulate it better to your own advantages. So in this example, we can understand that a deep gratification activity, that is any activity that takes a long time to achieve something, and in which we have to have a lot of faith in the outcome, and that outcome is very far away, and we can't see the reward until it is happening in way into the future. That is really difficult. It's really difficult. Like, we cannot conceptualize. I cannot conceptualize more than bloody 2 days, probably more than in 2 days into the future. So let alone 3 months or 3 years. That's very difficult. But if we look at activities which are really rewarding, are really fun, we look at video games. For example, like, let's say World of Warcraft or whatever. One of the reasons we can see that game is really enjoyable is because what it has done is it's created a system of instant gratification, of just a series of just instantly gratifying things. So, you do a quest. Okay, you picked up 3 things. Okay, now you go and deliver those 3 things to the guy. The guy gives you some gold, he gives you some experience, and he gives you some items. And maybe you leveled up. Now you have a new ability. Maybe you are 2 quests away from going to the next area with new enemies, something new to do with your friends, new instances, or maybe, that gold allows you to buy a new item, or maybe the item that you got is like really cool and you want to try it out. Or maybe like hitting the enemy is going to feel good because of the way they've designed it. It's going to have like this nice like thwack, and it's going to be very visceral. It's going to feel good. So look at how many sort of rewards there are for you just immediately. So, and it's very similar. This is actually why, for example, I think working out is really addictive to a lot of people, because working out it very effectively marries both of these ideas, the gratification and instant gratification. Because when you work out, every single workout, you feel like you've achieved something. Because that's what that example of World of Warcraft really is doing. It's showing you that progress. You're making progress. You're making progress. You can see the progress. It's super visible. And in the gym as well, it's like you get a sweat. You get a natural reward of the body releasing the chemical of endorphins into your system, which is like just getting a little mini high. And then, you feel as though like you feel good in your body, like your body has reward systems for expending effort, which is linked to, I think I read a study about this a long time ago. It's like linked to, it's supposed to encourage us to want to hunt, because we were like, again, this is a bit of a digression, but the way that we would hunt initially before we were able to create tools was called persistence hunting, in which we would because we can sweat, we were able to run for much longer distances than animals that cannot sweat, which I don't know if there's any other mammals that sweat, but except us. So we would just run stuff down. We would be able to sweat and release the heat. We wouldn't overheat. But then like the buffalo, whatever the hell it was that we were chasing, would then eventually overheat. And in its overheating, it would just collapse and then we kill it and eat it. Brilliant. So we get rewarded for that process. Same thing with sex, I imagine, like, with sex and, you have all these like chemicals and hormones, like, you get endorphins, you get like, was it oxytocin? Is that the one? It's like the love hormones is released. Like you get all these natural reward systems, right? So everything in life is sort of based around these incentives, with these rewards. So then like with this knowledge, you can start to think about, okay, what rewards can I give myself when it comes to a deeply gratifying activity? So like how can I make that better for myself? So you can sort of manipulate it in that way. So like one of the ways you can do this is like by chunking. Just you take an enormous task and you break it down into small chunks. So now in Counter-Strike, instead of just like grinding Counter-Strike week in, week out, looking to become a better player just by grinding, playing matchmaking and nothing else, not thinking about anything else, what you start to do is, all right, let's play one map. Like let's like focus on a couple maps. Let's focus on like a few roles, like and a couple positions. Let's look at some demos of some players who play those positions really well. Let's look at the kinds of weapons I'm going to be using, and let's look at the kind of techniques. Okay, this week I'm gonna, because I want to like improve my technique with this one gun, I'm gonna practice like mostly like 2 or 3 bullet bursting with an M4 and on aimbots like for 20 minutes to like really start to like get my movement down. Like let's practice my movement when I'm shooting. Like breaking this enormous task down into small little bits. Like is one way to really do it, and because then you can focus better and you can really see where the improvement and where the progress is going to happen because you're specifically breaking something down. So that's very, very useful when it comes to approaching this. And it's also really cool as well because practicing these ideas really leads into other very cool ideas from a psychology perspective, like mindfulness, for example. And obviously, this is an interesting idea that's used or talked about when it comes to, what a team is doing when they're, 15-7 down or something. And it's like, okay, it's one round at a time. We hear that all the time on broadcasts, and it really is like that. That's how you have to think about it. You think about it one round at a time, and you think about it that way because the whole context of the match is completely meaningless to you. All you need to think about, all you need to care about is making the best decision in any given moment. Like, because as soon as you sort of connect yourself to the entire context of the match, you're just opening yourself up to pressure, you're opening yourself up to all kinds of problems, and you have so many more distractions now that can impact your focus. And if your focus is impacted, we know that this will bring more of your sort of thoughts into, or it'll bring your consciousness more into, well, it'll bring you more into your conscious, like your very conscious, hyper-conscious sort of state of being, which is really bad when it comes to performance. That's something that we know as well. If you've ever hit the zone, if you've ever had a fab flow state, as they call it as well in psychology, then you've experienced what it's like to have your peak performance. And what's happening when you're in flow state, you're not even thinking. It's like your subconscious is doing everything. You're just going on autopilot. And what's happening when there's pressure, the opposite happens. You go into this mode where you feel like very conscious. Everything sort of slows down, but in the wrong way. It slows down because you're entering like the very low bandwidth part of your brain, which is the part of your brain which is like consciously thinking and so on. So it's really difficult, I think, to sort of strike that balance, but it's much easier once you're aware of it, because once you're aware of it, you can start to take practices and start to develop habits, and you sort of have a starting point as to where to look and how to act to help yourself prepare for these instances. So we've covered achievement, we covered mindfulness, we covered the constructive self-delusion. I think that might about do it really for this little jaunt. There's a few other things, but I don't want to splurge everything at once. So I hope that was somewhat enjoyable, just talking out some of those topics. And if you have any questions, please leave them down below. Or if you have any other topics that you'd like me to cover in a similar nature, I would be more than happy to welcome them if I find them to be interesting, and I appreciate it. So thank you very much for listening, and I'll catch you guys on the next one.